There we go. It's working. Um, Hi, my name's Chris, and I'm making this video for lifespan psychology, Bronfenbrenner's theory of systems. Um, he has basically a theory that involves social development of people, I guess, primarily, in their younger years, that consists of a microsystem, a mesosystem, an exosystem, and what he calls the macrosystem. Uh, so you'll have to forgive me. I don't usually do selfies and I don't do videos, so I'm going to wing this. I'm going to try to apply his systems to my life without boring anybody. But regarding the microsystem, if I'm looking over to the left occasionally, it's because I have cheat notes. The microsystem consists typically, as the textbook or his theory would say, as the family, the school, things that are in the immediate environment of a child when they're growing up. Mine is a family that consisted of two older brothers. I'm the youngest, and of course a mom and a dad. There wasn't any divorce, plenty of rancor, but not a lot. No one got divorced. My parents grew up in a orphanage, so it was a Methodist home. So my mother, in particular, had a Judeo-Christian background, typical of the early 20th century, first half, because the people who took care of her, raised her, were all from that part of the century. They grew up at Holston Home around late 40s, early 50s. So as a result, my mom did have, and my dad as well, had a lot of those values, and I was brought up in a household that, although far from perfect, was based on some conceptions of Judeo-Christian, and there are certain things boys do and boys don't do, and girls do and ladies don't do, and blah, 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 and so on, you know how that goes. But I had two older brothers that I had as examples growing up that I could use either as positive or negative examples, a little bit of both. And one of my theories was, by the time I was a teenager and I was able to figure it out, at least give it some conscious thought, was if I don't know what to do, look at one of my brothers that got in trouble and just say, I'll do the opposite. Just turn it around 180 degrees, do the opposite. I got to be at least warm. So I had that methodology when I was about 12 on, But in school, now here's where it kind of gets interesting. In school, I was in special ed. Not because I necessarily had cognitive issues with learning disabilities of any kind, but because mainly, as it turns out, as time went on, they thought it was at the time. But as time went on, they realized, it's all the medications this asthmatic and hyperallergenic child is. In the 70s, a lot of the drugs had a lot rougher side effects than they do now. As far as drowsiness, sleepiness, lethargy, that kind of thing. Attention span is all affected by that. And of course, as a lot of developmental psychiatrists would say, that has everything to do with children, say particularly up to about third grade, when you're learning to read and then reading to learn after that. By third grade, they did have me in these programs, and the difficulty there is that most of the kids in those programs tend to be children with either psychological or behavioral issues, coming from rough backgrounds as well in many cases. So as a result, I found myself spending what time I recall just trying to stay out of fights. But nonetheless, when junior high came along, that age when you start to outgrow some symptoms of things like that, childhood illnesses, I was able to stop taking a lot of those drugs, and suddenly, academically, my performance shot up. My attention span went up, my cognition went up intellectually at that point because, hey, I'm awake. But it's interesting, one of the phenomena I noticed and didn't understand at the time was, in elementary school, the other kids would regard me as one of the idiots. a kid. And he is not right behind between the heads. He's dumb. He doesn't know what 6 divided by 2 is. But by the time junior high rolled around, suddenly I was the egghead, and I was neither one, either case. I knew myself, but it nonetheless really puzzled and bothered me for a while until I made sense that others people's perceptions are not the same as one's own, and sometimes perception is reality. However, back to Bronfenbrenner again, to bring us all into something that means something with him. He describes the mesosystem as the interactions of things such as parents with the school, teachers, that kind of thing. What I liked was the summary where it says it's basically an interaction of all the microsystems. So that in a sense, it's not really a system unto itself like the others are. It's an interaction of 2 other systems. My parents, or at least my mom did primarily because my dad was working a lot, spent more time with the teachers talking about how Chris could need some improvement in this area or that area, or we can help him with this or that. Exosystems, extended family. I spent some time. I didn't really have an extended family. Given the fact that my parents grew up in an orphanage, there were no aunts and uncles, really, none to mention of. So my extended family became the people on my paper route, the people I mowed yards for in the neighborhood. I grew up primarily in a neighborhood that really didn't have any kids. What it had mostly were World War II vets, or people from that generation. So a lot of them became mentors, like uncles and aunts and cousins would become. And a couple of them actually took me under their wing and had me. It was more than just mowing their yard after it was over with. It was talking about this and how your parents doing with that, and they became like family. Again, the exosystem can also include things that I noticed with Bronfenbrenner. It could include things that are larger than just your immediate environment, such as the school system as opposed to the teachers. It could involve local authorities, school boards, elected or appointed officials. It could be social services, city and county planners, budgets, things like that. All of that gets back again, like in my case, I'm sure they had a budget for the school systems, they always do, and I'm sure they had a sub-budget for special ed programs, just like they do for sports or extracurricular stuff. So that's kind of where it goes with me. On the macro system now, again, it's interesting that these systems overlap a lot, even from the microsystem to the macro system, at least from my perspective. Again, you're dealing with, in the macro system, he describes it as general culture. Well, Judeo-Christian, or if you're from an Islamic country or a Catholic country, primarily Catholic, or from a country, say in Southeast Asia, that's primarily Buddhist. That's going to be one of those macro systems, that philosophy and the religious theology that colors everything that is encountered in the 2 or 3 smaller systems, the micro, exo, and the meso system. In my case, you're dealing with Southern culture, for lack of better description, Methodist, Protestant instead of Catholic. But nonetheless rather formal, given the environment my parents grew up in. It's interesting that we never did go to church regularly for various reasons, but nothing of any real profound reason why we didn't. We just didn't. The other is that I learned from the macro system and from the general pervasive culture of what I grew up in with a culture. It's interesting that I grew up in a neighborhood that consisted of mainly older people from an earlier generation that grew up during the Depression, then went off to war, and came back as a result, taking nothing for granted, whether it be careers, education, finances, living for that matter. And as a result, that culture was kind of passed on to me through programs such as Scouts, um, ROTC in high school, my jobs I had. I worked a lot in school. Uh, Self-reliance, independence, personal responsibility. Those sort of things are the sort of things you run into with the organizations I just mentioned and the generation of people overall that I grew up around on that street who substituted as my extended family. So basically that's where I got my inspiration to an interest in things such as politics, philosophy, law enforcement, occupationally wise, um, business, entrepreneurship. Those kind of things require those qualities in order to be successful at them. And I've wound up doing a little bit of all of those, incidentally. So that's kind of me, at least in a nutshell, in regards to Bronfenbrenner's theories of social development, as I can see it from his perspective. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Otherwise, thanks for your time, and I need somebody to figure out how to get me to get this thing on the website, because that's where I'm a neophyte. Thank you. Bye-bye.